I was perched on the edge of our kitchen counter, the hum of the refrigerator blending with the distant laughter from the living room. Tom was in there, surrounded by friends, his laughter booming above the rest. I should have been by his side, mingling and sharing jokes, but instead, I felt like a shadow in my own home. My phone buzzed, a welcome distraction from the creeping loneliness. It was Mike, Tom's best friend. "You okay?" His text read, simple yet filled with concern. "Yeah. Just taking a minute," I typed back, my fingers hesitating over the keys. Mike had always been the bridge between Tom and me, especially during times when Tom's job consumed him, leaving little room for anything else, including me. The conversation shifted quickly from casual check-ins to more personal territory. Mike's words were a salve to the neglected corners of my heart, making me laugh and feel seen in a way I hadn't in months. It was wrong, I knew, but it felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. A few days later, at a family barbecue we hosted, the tension between Mike and me reached a new peak. Amidst the sizzle of the grill and the cacophony of our friends' and family's conversations, our eyes met across the garden. It was a fleeting moment, charged with something forbidden yet undeniable. We both quickly looked away, but the air had shifted, charged with electricity only we could feel. As the evening wore on, Mike found moments to stand a little too close, his warmth a contrast to the cool night air. Our interactions were peppered with inside jokes and shared smiles, a secret language developing between us. The guilt was there, nagging at the edges of my mind, but it was drowned out by the exhilaration of being understood, of being wanted. When Tom later pulled me into his arms, oblivious to the storm brewing under his nose, I forced a smile, hating myself for the secrets I was beginning to keep. The distance between us had never felt so wide, even as his arms were wrapped tightly around me. It was a moment of clarity, clouded by confusion and a longing for something more, something that felt dangerously like stepping off a cliff. The night ended with promises to catch up and slap on the back goodbyes, but the glances Mike and I stole in those final moments spoke of a silent agreement. We were venturing into uncharted territory, driven by a connection that felt impossible to ignore. As I watched the tail lights disappear down the driveway, the silence that settled over the house was a stark reminder of the choices I was beginning to make, choices that could unravel the life I knew. The buzz of my phone shattered the silence of the early morning, a secret signal that pulled me from the warmth of my bed. Tom, still lost in sleep beside me, didn't stir as I slipped from under the covers, my heart racing with a mix of guilt and anticipation. The message was from Mike, as expected. "Can't stop thinking about yesterday. Need to see you again." Every rational part of me screamed that this was wrong, that the man I was sneaking around to meet wasn't my husband. Yet, there I was, quietly dressing in the dark, driven by a compulsion I couldn't resist. Our meetings had started innocently enough, cloaked under the pretense of mutual support. Mike was going through a tough time, and I, feeling increasingly invisible to my own husband, found comfort in our shared vulnerability. But with each clandestine encounter, the line between emotional support and physical longing blurred until it vanished altogether. We met in the seclusion of the early morning, in places where the likelihood of being seen was minimal. Parks at dawn, the back booths of little-known cafes, anywhere our worlds wouldn't collide with the one I shared with Tom. The thrill of secrecy was intoxicating, a dangerous game that made my heart race in ways I hadn't felt in years. But with the thrill came the inevitable crash. It happened during one of our stolen mornings, a message that appeared on my phone while Mike and I were tangled in each other's arms, hidden away in the dim light of his apartment. It was from my cousin, Laura, a screenshot of a conversation that was unmistakably between Mike and me. The words, "I need to tell Tom," were like a bucket of ice water, pulling me back to a reality I had been trying to escape. The confrontation with Tom was inevitable. He had always been more perceptive than I gave him credit for, and with the evidence laid bare, there was no room for the lies I had been weaving in my head. I sat across from him, the weight of my betrayal heavy in the air between us. His eyes, once warm with love, were now cold with hurt and confusion. "Is it true?" His voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tremor, the battle to keep his emotions in check. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze, tears spilling over despite my attempts to hold them back. "But it was just emotional, Tom. I swear it never went further than that." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, a desperate attempt to salvage whatever fragments of our marriage remained. He wanted to believe me, I could see it in the way his eyes searched mine for the truth. But the trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was now shattered, replaced by doubt and suspicion. "I was afraid of losing you," I whispered, the truth in those words piercing through the layers of deceit. "I thought I was invisible to you, Tom. I just wanted to feel wanted again." The silence that followed was deafening, a chasm that neither of us knew how to bridge. We were two strangers, bound by a love that had been tarnished by secrets and lies. As Tom stood and walked away, the finality of his steps echoed in my heart, a stark reminder of the cost of my indiscretion. The future of our marriage, once so certain, now hung in the balance, suspended between the pain of betrayal and the faint hope of forgiveness. The morning light hadn't even kissed the horizon when I woke up, a gnawing sense of unrest churning in my stomach. The confrontation with Tom the night before had left a raw, gaping wound in what was left of our marriage. I lay there, watching him sleep, the rise and fall of his chest a constant reminder of the life we built together, now teetering on the edge of collapse. My phone vibrated quietly against the nightstand, a silent herald of the chaos that had become my life. It was Mike, his message a simple, "Are you okay?" But those words, meant to offer comfort, felt more like a weight, dragging me deeper into the mess I had created. In a moment of weakness, or perhaps a desperate bid for some semblance of control, I replied, setting in motion a series of events that would change everything. "Need to see you," I typed back, the decision igniting a flurry of activity. Slipping out of bed, I dressed in the semi-darkness, each movement a betrayal of the vows I had once held sacred. The meeting with Mike was a blur, a rush of emotions and physicality that left me feeling hollow. We rationalized our actions with a sense of fatalistic abandon, convincing ourselves that the damage was done, so why not indulge in our desires? It was a dangerous game we were playing, one where the stakes were the very foundation of my marriage. Returning home, I was met with Tom's hopeful gaze, a look that twisted the knife of guilt even deeper. "Maybe we should try therapy," I found myself saying, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a feeble attempt to claw back some control, to navigate us out of the storm I had steered us into, all while hiding the continued affair like a dark secret. Tom's agreement to therapy was a bittersweet victory. He was fighting for us, for our marriage, unaware that I was still entangled in the web of deceit. The sessions were a dance of half-truths and veiled confessions, where I played the role of the repentant wife, all while Mike's shadow loomed over us, unseen but ever present. As the weeks passed, Tom's initial optimism began to wane, replaced by a growing suspicion. He noticed the inconsistencies in my stories, the way my gaze would flicker away when he sought the truth in my eyes. The distance between us grew, a chasm filled with unspoken accusations and festering doubts. One evening, as we sat across from each other, the air heavy with the weight of our unsaid thoughts, Tom's voice broke the silence. "Something's not right, Julia. I can feel it." His words were calm, but the underlying hurt was palpable, a testament to the pain I had inflicted. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the man I had vowed to spend my life with, the man whose heart I had shattered. In that moment, the facade I had been maintaining crumbled, the reality of my actions crashing down around me. The unraveling of our marriage was no longer a distant threat but a painful reality, one that I had orchestrated with my own hands. As Tom waited for an answer, a response that could somehow mend the fractures I had caused, I realized the true cost of my betrayal. It was not just the potential end of our marriage but the loss of the man I loved, a man who was slowly becoming a stranger because of the choices I had made. The plan was reckless, a desperate grasp at something that felt like happiness, even if it was built on a foundation of lies. Mike and I had concocted a story about a business trip, a plausible excuse for a weekend away from the reality of our lives. The thrill of escape was intoxicating, blinding us to the inevitable consequences of our actions. But as we drove to the secluded hotel, a pit of anxiety grew in my stomach, a silent warning that the facade was about to crumble. Tom's discovery was like a scene from a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The look on his face when he found us together in the hotel lobby was a mixture of betrayal, hurt, and disbelief. Time seemed to stand still as the three of us stood there, the tension thick in the air. Mike, ever the opportunist, tried to take control of the situation, his voice shaky but determined. "Tom, this was my fault. I pushed for this." The words were meant to deflect blame, but they sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Tom's gaze shifted to me, a silent plea for an explanation, a reason for the betrayal that had torn his world apart. In that moment, All the justifications and excuses I had built up in my mind crumbled under the weight of his pain. I was lonely, Tom. You were always so busy, and I felt like I didn't matter anymore, I stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush of desperation. It wasn't just about the physical stuff. I needed to feel wanted, to feel seen. It was a mistake, but it was a cry for help too. The justification sounded feeble even to my ears, a weak attempt to shift the blame onto him for my own actions. Tom's expression hardened, the hurt giving way to a cold resolve. A cry for help? He echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. By betraying me? By lying to me? The confrontation was a turning point, the moment when the fragile thread holding our marriage together finally snapped. The pain in Tom's eyes was a mirror to the chaos in my heart, a reflection of the destruction my selfishness had caused. As he turned and walked away, the finality of his steps echoed in the empty spaces of my soul, a harsh reminder of the cost of my actions. In the silence that followed, the excuses and justifications I had clung to felt empty and hollow. The reality of what I had done, of the pain I had inflicted on the man I had vowed to love and cherish, settled over me like a suffocating blanket. The weekend getaway, meant to be an escape, had become a prison of my own making, a place where the illusions I had created shattered against the hard truth of my betrayal. The silence of the hotel room was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions raging within me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door Tom had walked out of, a door that felt like the final seal on the coffin of our marriage. The reality of his departure, the physical manifestation of his decision to leave, hit me like a tidal wave. It was over. The life we had built together, the dreams we had shared, all washed away in the wake of my betrayal. Returning home was like walking into a ghost town, the remnants of Tom's presence haunting every corner. His closet was empty, his favorite mug no longer on the hook by the coffee machine. The tangible signs of his departure were everywhere, each one a dagger to my already bleeding heart. The gravity of my choices, the irreparable damage I had done, settled over me with a weight I couldn't bear. In a haze of desperation and guilt, I reached out to Tom, a plea for forgiveness, for a second chance I knew I didn't deserve. Tom, please, can we talk? I'm so sorry, more than words can express. I know I've hurt you, but I can't stand the thought of our story ending like this, I texted him, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. His response came hours later, each minute stretching into an eternity of waiting. Julia, I still love you, but what you did, I can't just forget it. I need time and space to heal, he replied, his words a lifeline in the storm, yet a clear boundary I knew I had to respect. The realization that I had lost him, not just for now but possibly forever, was a bitter pill to swallow. The man I loved, the person I had envisioned growing old with, was slipping through my fingers, all because of choices I had made. Choices that, in the pursuit of something I thought I needed, had cost me everything. In the days and weeks that followed, the silence of the house was a constant reminder of the void left by Tom's absence. The routines we had shared, the small moments of joy and companionship, were gone, replaced by a loneliness that felt insurmountable. It was in this solitude that the full weight of my actions truly hit me, the understanding that seeking redemption was not just about winning Tom back, but about confronting the parts of myself that had led me down this path. The journey to redemption was fraught with challenges, each day a battle against the guilt and shame that threatened to consume me. But it was also a journey of self-discovery, of facing the uncomfortable truths about myself and the damage my actions had caused. As I embarked on this path, the hope for reconciliation with Tom was a distant beacon, guiding me through the darkness, yet overshadowed by the daunting task of rebuilding myself from the ground up. The echo of my footsteps in the empty hallway of my home was a stark reminder of the solitude that had enveloped my life. Gone were the days of laughter and warmth that Tom and I shared. In its place was a silence that was both a refuge and a prison. The fallout from my actions had rippled far beyond the confines of my marriage, touching every aspect of my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. The phone calls from friends and family became fewer and farther between, each conversation strained and filled with unspoken judgments. It was clear where their loyalties lay, and the isolation that ensued was a bitter pill to swallow. The support network I had taken for granted was crumbling before my eyes, leaving me to navigate the stormy waters of my new reality alone. Even Mike, the man for whom I had risked everything, became a ghost in the aftermath. His own life upended by the revelations, he chose self-preservation over solidarity, severing ties with a cold finality that left me reeling. The realization that I was truly alone, without the crutch of either man to lean on, forced me to confront the magnitude of my decisions head on. In an attempt to claw my way out of the depths of despair, I sought counseling, a space where I could unload the burden of guilt and shame that weighed heavily on my shoulders. Each session was a battle, a confrontation with the darkest parts of myself that I had long avoided. The path to healing was fraught with obstacles, the ghosts of my past decisions haunting me at every turn. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the mundane tasks of daily life and momentarily forget the chaos that had become my personal life. But the facade of normalcy I projected was just that, a facade. Beneath the surface, the loneliness and guilt were constant companions, a reminder of the cost of my actions. The journey to rebuild my life was a solitary one, each step forward a Herculean effort. The absence of the people I had once held dear was a constant ache, a void that no amount of professional success could fill. The realization that I had to forge a new path, one that was distinctly mine and not defined by the relationships I had lost, was both daunting and liberating. As I navigated the treacherous waters of self-discovery and redemption, the lessons learned from the fallout of my actions became the building blocks of the new life I was slowly piecing together. The road ahead was uncertain, the outcomes unknown, but the resolve to emerge from the shadows of my past decisions stronger and wiser was the guiding light in the darkness that had become my existence. The chill of the early morning air bit at my skin as I stood outside the cafe where Tom and I had agreed to meet. It had been months since we last spoke, each day stretching into an eternity of silence and uncertainty. The weight of the impending conversation pressed heavily on my chest, a mix of dread and a desperate hope for some form of closure. As I pushed the door open, the familiar jingle of the bell felt like a herald to the end of an era. Tom was already there, seated at our usual spot by the window, a ghost of our past life together. The sight of him stirred a whirlwind of emotions within me, love and loss intertwining in a painful dance. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a calmness that was unnervingly serene. "Julia," he greeted, his voice steady and devoid of the warmth I had once known. The conversation that followed was a delicate navigation through the minefield of our shared history. Tom spoke of forgiveness, of the pain and betrayal he had worked through to find peace. "I forgive you, Julia, not for you, but for me. Holding on to anger won't let me move on," he said, his words a balm to the guilt that had been my constant companion. But with his forgiveness came the final blow to any lingering hopes of reconciliation. "I'm leaving, Julia. Moving out of state," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "We can't go back to what we were. I need a fresh start, away from everything that reminds me of us." The finality of his words struck me with a force I hadn't anticipated. It was one thing to intellectually accept the end of our marriage, but another to face the reality of Tom's departure. The man I had loved, the life we had built together, was slipping through my fingers, leaving me to face the consequences of my actions alone. In the days that followed, a profound sense of emptiness enveloped me, a realization that the affair was not just a mistake but a symptom of deeper issues within myself. The loneliness, the need for validation, the inability to communicate my feelings had all contributed to the destruction of my marriage. It was a bitter pill to swallow, the acknowledgement that I was the architect of my own misery. Determined to not let my past define my future, I took a step that once seemed unthinkable. I joined a support group for people who had made similar mistakes, a community of strangers united by the common thread of regret and the desire for redemption. Sitting in that circle of chairs, listening to stories that mirrored my own, I found a semblance of solace, a glimmer of hope that healing was possible. The journey of self-discovery and healing was not an easy one. Each day presented its own challenges, moments of doubt and despair that threatened to derail my progress. But with each passing day, I grew stronger, more resilient. The support group became a lifeline, a place where I could be vulnerable without fear of judgment, where I could learn from my past without being defined by it. As I walked out of the support group meeting one evening, the setting sun casting long shadows on the pavement, I realized that this was not the end of my story but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was no longer a victim of my circumstances but the author of my own destiny. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and the possibility of new mistakes. But armed with the lessons learned from my past, I stepped into the future with a newfound determination to live a life of purpose, integrity, and self